Welcome to our deep dive, everybody. Today we're diving into the world of the Norman.
The Normans.
Yeah, we'll be looking at excerpts from, the Wikipedia article on Normans. And honestly, I'm really excited for this one.
Okay.
My knowledge of the Normans pretty much begins and ends with William the Conqueror.
Yeah.
10^6. But I have a feeling there's more to their story.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. To guide us on this journey, we've got with us an expert in medieval European history, specializing in the Norman era.
Yes.
It's great to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
So let's jump right in. When we hear Normans, what should we really be picturing? Is it just, the helmets and the Battle of Hastings?
Well, the image of the Norman warrior conquering England is certainly a powerful one, but it's just a small piece of a much larger and more complex story. I think the Normans were a fascinating blend of cultures and influences, and their impact extended far beyond the shores of England.
Okay, so there's more to them than just that one famous battle.
Yes.
So where should we even begin? Where did they come from?
Well, I think the story quite literally begins with their name. Norman derives from Northmen,
Northmen, okay.
a clear indication of their Scandinavian Viking roots. So, beginning in the 9th century, these Norse Vikings began settling in what is now northwest France, and they intermingled with the local Frankish population.
So we're talking Vikings who decided to trade their longships for farmland.
Yes.
That's a pretty big shift.
It was a big shift, and it wasn't a smooth transition, of course. There were conflicts, there were power struggles, but what's remarkable is how these Viking settlers adapted. And they integrated into Frankish society. They adopted the French language, they adopted French customs, and eventually they even adopted the Christian faith.
It's fascinating how they were able to blend these two seemingly disparate cultures, Viking and Frankish, to create something entirely new. What were these early Normans like?
Well, an 11th century historian, Goffredo Malaterra, described them as ambitious, cunning, adaptable, and lovers of warfare. He admired their eloquence, their skill, but also cautioned against their unbridled nature.
Unbridled. That sounds like they could be a bit of a handful.
Okay.
But it also sounds like the recipe for a group that could leave a significant mark on history.
Exactly. And their ability to adapt and integrate would become, I think, a defining characteristic of their story.
Okay.
Take, for example, the pivotal year of 9/11 and the Treaty of St. Clair-sur-Epte.
Okay. What happened in 9/11?
Well, in 9/11, a Viking leader named Rollo, who had been a thorn in the side of the French for years, struck a deal with the French king, Charles the Simple.
Okay.
Rollo agreed to stop raiding, convert to Christianity, and swear fealty to the king in exchange for a sizable territory in what is now Normandy.
Wait, so the French king just handed over a chunk of his kingdom to a Viking warlord?
It might seem that way on the surface, but it was a brilliant strategic move by Charles the Simple. He was struggling to defend his kingdom from Viking raids, and Rollo was a powerful and charismatic leader. By bringing Rollo into the fold, Charles effectively neutralized a major threat, and he gained a valuable ally.
So Rollo went from Viking raider to essentially a French duke. That's quite a career change.
It is, and his descendants continued this trend of integration. They embraced French customs, legal systems, they even married into the local aristocracy. Within a century, these former Vikings were virtually indistinguishable from their Frankish neighbors.
It's amazing how they were able to transform themselves from outsiders to insiders. Did they just settle down and live happily ever after in their new French homeland?
Not quite. The Normans, it turns out, had a much larger role to play in European history, and their story wasn't confined to Normandy. While they were establishing themselves in France, they were also making waves in a seemingly unlikely place, southern Italy.
Southern Italy. That's a long way from Normandy. What were they doing down there?
Well, this is where the Norman story takes a truly adventurous turn. In the early 11th century, Norman adventurers started arriving in southern Italy, initially as mercenaries.
So they were like soldiers for hire.
Precisely. Southern Italy at the time was a complex mix of Byzantine, Lombard, and Arab influences, all vying for power. The Normans, with their reputation as fierce warriors, were in high demand.
Yeah.
But they weren't just mindless soldiers. They saw an opportunity to carve out their own domain in this chaotic landscape.
Classic Norman ambition.
Yes.
How did they go from hired muscle to rulers of southern Italy?
It was a gradual process, but they were incredibly adept at exploiting the political divisions in the region. They forged alliances, they played factions against each other, and most importantly, they won battles. By the mid-11th century, they had established their first real foothold, the county of Aversa near Naples.
Hold on. So they were establishing a Norman presence in Italy at the same time they were settling in Normandy.
Yes.
That's wild.
It's remarkable how, in the span of just a few generations, they went from Viking raiders to rulers in two completely different parts of Europe.
Yeah.
And they weren't done yet. The Hauteville family, one of the most prominent Norman families, led the charge, pushing further south, conquering territories from both the Byzantines and the Arabs.
This is mind-blowing. It's like a complete 180 from their Viking ancestors.
It is, and they did it all while maintaining their unique ability to adapt and integrate. They didn't simply impose their rule, they blended Norman, Byzantine, and Arab traditions to create a vibrant and surprisingly tolerant society in southern Italy.
Okay.
In fact, the Norman kingdom of Sicily became renowned for its multiculturalism, with Muslims, Jews, and Christians living together in relative harmony.
Imagine that. A medieval kingdom where diversity was not just tolerated, but actually encouraged.
It was truly remarkable for its time.
Yeah.
And it highlights, I think, a key aspect of the Norman story. They weren't just conquerors, they were builders, they were innovators, and surprisingly adept at managing diverse populations.
So they've got a duchy in Normandy, they're conquering southern Italy. Where do they go from here? What happens next?
Well, this is where we finally get to that pivotal year, 1066. And the Norman conquest of England.
Ah, yes, the event that really put the Normans on the map, at least in most history books. But I have a feeling you're going to give us a much more nuanced view of that whole event.
I certainly try my best, but before we dive into the details of the conquest itself, we need to understand the complex relationship that already existed between the Normans and England. You see, long before William the Conqueror set foot on English soil, there were already seeds of Norman influence taking root in England.
Okay.
And it all goes back to a rather intriguing marriage.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Tell me more about this marriage and how it set the stage for the Norman conquest of England.
Let's delve into that in part 2 of our Norman deep dive.
I can't wait. Okay, we left off with the Normans establishing themselves in Normandy and southern Italy. And you hinted at a marriage that would have major repercussions for England. I'm all ears. Tell me more.
This marriage involved Emma of Normandy, the sister of Duke Richard II,
Okay.
and King Ethelred II of England.
Okay.
Their union in the early 11th century would have significant consequences down the line. It's like a slow-burning fuse leading to an explosion of historical change.
Intriguing. I'm guessing this isn't just some happy ever after royal love story.
Not exactly. When Ethelred was forced from the English throne by the Danish king Canute the Great, he fled to Normandy with Emma.
Okay.
They remained there in exile until Canute's death in 1035.
So their sons grew up surrounded by Norman culture. I bet that had an influence on them.
Absolutely. When Ethelred's son, Edward the Confessor, returned to England to claim the throne, he brought a bit of Normandy with him. He'd spent his formative years immersed in Norman ways, surrounded by their advisors and customs.
So even before the conquest, there was already a Norman presence in England.
Precisely. Edward appointed Norman advisors to key positions in the English court, much to the chagrin of the English nobility. He even brought in Norman knights to form a cavalry force. His favoritism towards the Normans created tension and resentment, laying the groundwork for the events to come.
It sounds like he was almost paving the way for a Norman takeover, even if unintentionally.
It's hard to know his true intentions,
Right.
but his actions certainly made things easier for William the Conqueror down the line. And when Edward died in 1066 without a clear heir, it ignited a power struggle for the English throne.
Okay, so the stage is set. Norman influence is growing in England, and William, Duke of Normandy, is waiting in the wings. What happens next?
Chaos, essentially. Edward's death created a power vacuum with multiple contenders vying for the throne.
Right.
You had William, of course, believing Edward had promised him the crown.
Okay.
Then there was Harold Godwinson, a powerful English earl, and Harold Hardrada, the Viking king of Norway.
Talk about a high-stakes Game of Thrones.
Okay.
So how did it all play out? Was it a straightforward Norman invasion?
Not at all. The year 1066 was a whirlwind of dramatic events.
Okay.
First, Harold Hardrada invaded northern England.
Okay.
Harold Godwinson marched north and defeated the Vikings at the Battle of Stamford Bridge.
Okay.
But this victory came at a cost. His army was weakened and had to rush south to face a new threat. William and his Norman forces.
So Harold was caught between a rock and a hard place.
Exactly. While Harold was battling Vikings, William had been amassing his forces and building a fleet. He landed on the south coast of England, forcing Harold into a desperate fight just weeks after his victory in the north.
This is where we get to the iconic Battle of Hastings. Was it really as decisive as the history books make it sound?
The Battle of Hastings, fought on October 14th, 1066, was a brutal and decisive clash. The Normans, with their superior cavalry and archers, wore down the English forces. Harold Godwinson was killed.
Oh, wow.
And William the Conqueror claimed the English throne, forever altering the course of English history.
So it wasn't just a single battle. It was the culmination of years of political maneuvering, strategic alliances, and Norman ambition. What happened to England after William's victory? Did they just become Norman puppets?
William was a shrewd ruler. He knew brute force alone wouldn't secure his hold on England.
Right.
He implemented a series of sweeping changes. He replaced the English nobility with his loyal Norman followers, granting them vast estates and building castles to secure his power. He also commissioned the Domesday Book, a comprehensive survey of England, to assess the land and its resources for taxation.
So the Normans basically reshaped the English landscape, both politically and physically. What kind of long-term impact did this have?
Their impact was profound and enduring. They introduced new systems of law and governance, transformed the English language with the influx of Norman French words, and left behind an architectural legacy of castles, cathedrals, and monasteries that still stand today.
It's amazing to think about how different England might be today if William had lost at Hastings. It really highlights the significance of that one event.
Absolutely. The Norman conquest was a turning point in English history, shaping its language, culture, and destiny.
But the Norman story doesn't end with the conquest of England, does it?
Not even close. Their ambition extended far beyond England. Remember their exploits in southern Italy?
Right, they were busy carving out a kingdom down there.
And their sights were set on an even bigger prize, the Byzantine Empire, one of the most powerful empires in the world at the time.
The Byzantine Empire. Weren't the Normans a bit out of their league?
Perhaps, but that never stopped them before. The Byzantine Empire, centered in Constantinople, controlled vast territories and immense wealth. It was a tempting target for ambitious Normans seeking land, riches, and glory.
So how did they get involved with the Byzantine Empire? Another full-blown invasion?
It began more subtly. Norman adventurers, drawn by opportunities for wealth and advancement, started entering Byzantine service in the 11th century.
Okay.
They were renowned for their military skills and found themselves battling a variety of foes, including the Seljuk Turks, Pechenegs, and even other Christian groups.
So they went from fighting for the Byzantines to eventually fighting against them. How did that happen?
Remember Robert Guiscard, the Norman Duke of Apulia?
The one who made a deal with the Pope?
That's the one. Robert had his eye on Byzantine territory in southern Italy and the Balkans.
Okay.
In 1081, he launched a major invasion, aiming to capture the strategically important city of Dyrrhachium, modern-day Durrës, in Albania.
So Norman alliances really were fluid, shifting based on ambition and opportunity. What was the outcome of Robert's invasion? Did they manage to conquer Constantinople?
They came close, but ultimately no. The siege of Dyrrhachium was a long and bloody affair. The Normans battered the city's defenses, but the Byzantines held firm. Robert was eventually forced to lift the siege and retreat.
So the Byzantines managed to hold them off?
For the time being, yes. But this was just the beginning of a long and complex struggle between the Normans and Byzantines that would continue for decades. They would clash in the Balkans, southern Italy, and even in the Holy Land during the Crusades.
It's amazing how these descendants of Vikings ended up playing such a significant role on the world stage.
It really is. Their story is a testament to their adaptability, ambition, and military prowess. But their impact wasn't limited to the battlefield. They were also patrons of the arts, innovators in architecture, and masters of administration. Their legacy extends far beyond their Scandinavian origins.
This has been incredibly eye-opening. I had no idea how far-reaching the Norman influence was.
Their story is often overshadowed by other major events of medieval history, but it deserves to be told. Their impact on Europe, the Mediterranean, and the world is undeniable. But their story isn't over yet. We've talked about their conquests in England and southern Italy, their clashes with the Byzantine Empire, but there's another chapter to explore, their role in the Crusades.
The Crusades. That seems like a whole other deep dive. I'm eager to learn more about how these former Vikings became involved in this pivotal period of history.
Let's delve into that in part 3 of our Norman exploration.
We've journeyed from the shores of Scandinavia to the battlefields of England and southern Italy, and now we find ourselves on the cusp of the Crusades. It's hard to picture these former Vikings as champions of Christianity marching off to the Holy Land.
It is a fascinating shift, isn't it? But remember, the Normans were incredibly adaptable. By the late 11th century, they were a powerful force within Christendom. They had embraced the faith, forged alliances with the papacy, and were eager to prove themselves on a new stage.
So the Crusades presented a perfect opportunity to showcase their piety and military might.
Precisely. The First Crusade, called for by Pope Urban II in 1095, aimed to recapture Jerusalem and the Holy Land from the Seljuk Turks. It was a call to arms that resonated deeply with the Norman spirit of adventure and, let's be honest, their ambition for conquest.
So what was their actual involvement in this First Crusade? Were they just a small contingent or major players?
Norman participation was significant, especially for relative newcomers to the broader Christian world. One figure stands out in particular, Bohemond of Toronto.
Bohemond of Toronto. That name rings a bell.
He was the son of Robert Guiscard, the Norman Duke of Apulier, who we discussed earlier. He inherited his father's ambition and military talent, but he saw the crusade as more than just a holy mission. It was a chance to gain land, power, and prestige for himself and the Normans.
So he was using the crusade to further his own goals.
You could say that. Bohemond raised a large army in southern Italy and set sail for the east in 1096. He quickly proved himself to be a skilled and ruthless military leader, playing key roles in several crucial victories, including the Siege of Nicaea and the Battle of Dorylaeum. But it was the Siege of Antioch in 1098 that really showcased Bohemond's cunning.
Antioch was a major city in the Byzantine Empire, wasn't it?
It was, and Bohemond had his eye on it long before the Crusade. He saw it as a strategically vital city and a potential power base for himself. After a long and bloody siege, the Crusaders, led by Bohemond, captured Antioch, but instead of handing it back to the Byzantines as agreed, Bohemond claimed it for himself, establishing the Principality of Antioch.
So he essentially betrayed his Byzantine allies and carved out his own kingdom. That's a bold move.
It was a calculated risk, but it paid off, at least for a time. The Principality of Antioch became one of the most important Crusader states, a bastion of Norman power in the Levant for several decades.
So from newcomers to rulers of their own Crusader state, the Normans certainly made their mark on the Holy Land.
They did. And their story in the Crusades doesn't end there. Remember, we mentioned Cyprus.
Right. You hinted that the Normans played a role in its conquest. What's the story there?
Well, this episode involves another famous English king of Norman descent, Richard the Lionheart.
Richard the Lionheart, the Crusader king known for his bravery and chivalry. He was a descendant of William the Conqueror, wasn't he?
Indeed he was. In 1191, while en route to the Holy Land for the Third Crusade, Richard's fleet was caught in a storm, scattering his ships. Some, including the one carrying his fiancée, Berengaria of Navarre, were forced to land in Cyprus.
Oh, no. I bet the ruler of Cyprus wasn't too pleased about that.
You're right. Isaac Komnenos, a Byzantine nobleman who had declared himself Emperor of Cyprus, was not happy about these unexpected guests. He made the mistake of taking Richard's fiancée and several other nobles hostage, demanding a ransom.
Bad move. I'm guessing Richard wasn't the negotiating type, especially when it came to his fiancée's safety.
He was furious. He gathered his forces, landed on Cyprus, and conquered the entire island within weeks.
Classic Richard the Lionheart. It sounds like something out of a medieval romance.
Yeah.
What did he do with Cyprus after conquering it?
Realizing its strategic importance, Richard sold Cyprus to the Knights Templar, a powerful military order who established a base there. So the Normans, through Richard, played a key role in bringing Cyprus into the fold of the Crusader states.
Their reach really did extend across the Mediterranean world. What a remarkable journey for a people who started as Viking raiders.
It's a testament to their adaptability and ambition. They went from pillaging settlements to ruling kingdoms, embracing new cultures, and shaping the course of history in ways that are still felt today.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of the Normans, what's the one big takeaway you want me to remember?
I think the key to the Norman story is their adaptability. They weren't bound by tradition or a rigid sense of who they were supposed to be. They were masters of reinvention, constantly evolving to thrive in new environments, shaping the world in their image.
It's a powerful lesson that adaptability is essential for navigating the twists and turns of life, just like the Normans did. Thanks for taking me on this incredible journey through their world. I feel like I've uncovered a hidden chapter of history, one full of ambition, conquest, and, surprisingly, cultural integration.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the Normans. Until next time, keep exploring.